Good morning, everyone. We've come to Town Hall, and we're going to start a little bit early. Almost never happens. Got a few more seats up here if we need to do that. Welcome to Castle Rock Town Hall. On behalf of the partners that have put this together, Castle Rock Chamber of Commerce, Castle Rock Economic Development Council, the Castle Rock Department, or Downtown Development Authority, and the town, we want to welcome you. I'm Dave Corliss, I'm the town manager, and I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Garner. I'm not going to ask the question, what is demography? We're going to learn that here in just a few minutes. But I am going to introduce Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is the Colorado State Demographer. She's with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, which is an agency that works with Colorado local governments to strengthen their capacity throughout the entire state. She leads the State Demography Office, which produces population and economic estimates and forecasts for use by state agencies and local governments. She has over 25 years of experience analyzing population and economic trends in the state. And her current areas of research include aging in Colorado, which some of the people in the audience know something about, characteristics of migration and poverty. Elizabeth is an economist and received her BA in business at the University of San Diego and her master's in agricultural and resource economics at Colorado State University. She is also a Colorado native, something only 43% of the state's population can claim. So let's give a Castle Rock welcome to Elizabeth Garner.
All right, I'm going to do a quick testing. Is that working for you guys? Perfect. Wow, I am so impressed that there's so many folks coming out so early in the morning to listen to demographics. And I guess it is really important to talk about what is demographics, and it's really not rocket science whatsoever. It really is the study of population change and the factors leading to it. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is really looking at what do we see going forward, kind of really big picture, long run for the state, and where does Douglas County and Castle Rock kind of fit into that picture. These are kind of some of the key themes that I want you guys to take away from this presentation, is really thinking about migration. And can Colorado and Douglas County and Castle Rock continue to attract and retain the best and the brightest? And where do we put them? I mean, that's one of the biggest questions that a lot of the state is talking about, is where do we put all of this growth? Talking about age and aging, and we do it every day, and it's a good thing. If you're not doing it, you're not around. So really, in talking about how that is going to really impact the state, and especially Douglas County, which leads into slowing labor force growth. Anybody having problems with attracting a workforce, a labor force? We think it's tough now. Just wait. Okay, so some things to talk about that. Industrial transitions. There's a lot of transitions in our economy, especially in retail trade. Ooh, a huge factor in Castle Rock, as well as manufacturing and construction, some big transition in those industries as well, and how will that affect us. Looking at that increased race and ethnic diversity in the state, and are we ready, and are we preparing, and are we engaging that transition? Looking at slowing income growth. Knowing again that retail trade is such a huge factor here, what does slowing income growth potentially mean, and how do we plan for it? And then really talking about continued growth, yet slowing growth in Colorado's population change. So really, to understand where Castle Rock and Douglas County fit into the big picture, it's important to see what's going on in the U.S. as a whole. So the U.S. is at about 323 million people. An increase annually of about 2.2 million people a year, about a 0.7% growth rate. That's a lot of people, huh? 2.2 million? Slowest growth rate in the U.S. since the Great Depression in the 1930s. Who would have known, right? But it's important to know that that is actually taking place, even though in Colorado, we're seeing that we're at about 5.5, and this was in 2016, we're at about 5.6 now, million people in the state, 7th fastest in terms of population change at 1.7%, behind some pretty fast-growing states of Utah, Nevada, Idaho. Idaho. Really, Idaho? Yes, Idaho. There's some big firms actually moving into Idaho and attracting a great labor force. Florida, Washington, and Oregon, so really all Western-oriented except for Florida. 8th in total growth at 91,000, behind some really big states. Now, any Texans out there? No one? No one willing to admit it. Look at that. She's saying, former. Wow, not even accepting it. When they grow, any idea how fast or how many people increase annually in Texas? 450,000 people a year. Yikes. Okay, behind them, Florida, California, Washington, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. But within the state, we know that things are very different. We put the 2 fastest growing in terms of total change counties this last year were El Paso and Denver. It kind of both ends of you guys. And then Douglas County right there in the middle at 6,100, 7th fastest in total change, 19th fastest in percentage change. But if we look at the state as a whole, if we look at total population change since 2010, all of the red, orange, yellow counties are counties that are increasing in population. All of the shades of blue are counties that are declining in population. So here we are, one of the fastest growing states with one of the best economies, yet since 2010, 21 counties are declining in population. And it really is an interesting dichotomy that we have in the state. We've got some of these red counties along the Front Range that are saying, slow down. And some of those blue counties on the periphery saying, come to us, come to us. So it's really important to know that what you're facing here in Douglas County and in Castle Rock isn't what everybody's feeling in the state, that there's definitely areas of the state that are wishing that they'd have a couple of folks come their way, maybe not as many as you guys get, but a couple of folks come their direction. When we look at population, and I know you're looking at this and you're like, God, that's a boring chart. Well, I wanted to show the growth in Castle Rock over time, starting back there in 1990 is where the graph starts, increasing, fairly, flat, not flat growth, but increasing at a nice pace in those early 90s, but then totally taking off basically from 1998, 99, all the way through when we hit the Great Recession. And then slowing down a little bit, and then for the last year, a little flat. I wouldn't say real flat, but just a nice level. What's important to see is that really relative to the state, both Douglas County and Castle Rock have had huge growth. A lot of it is where you started at, back in 1990, both the county and the city, relative to the state. But really, Douglas County was the list of the fastest growing county in the U.S. for, I think, almost 10 years straight. And now we're starting to see that it's slowing down, but it's because your base is bigger, not necessarily because fewer people are coming to the county. When we look at total population change, what leads to that? Why do you get people? Well, the bottom component is natural increase, which is births minus deaths. And we can see it's relatively, stable over time. But what's interesting is that I think we reached our peak in 2008. Thinking to yourself, what? How could we have reached our peak in 2008? Well, I'll talk a little bit about it, but basically, we're slowing down births and we're increasing deaths. I was like, oh, is there a plague? No, no plague. We're just a larger share of our population are in ages that are more likely to die. And so we've got these two components going together, which is putting downward pressure on natural increase. If we look then at net migration, which is the red component, you can see it goes all over the place. All of you, or most of you, are in business. You'll notice that that looks like a business cycle. So we know that there's a huge part of our economy that's driven are a huge part of our population change that's driven by the economy. So this is Douglas County. Little different. Look at that growth really, throughout the 90s, and that's really when you were at the top of the list for the US. And over time, where you are now, slowing down in that net migration, but still pretty significant over time, but you can also see kind of those business cycles. Also looking at your natural increase, it's funny, Douglas County is known as like the county of kids, but in a lot of places, we're seeing that that's really starting to flatten out and starting to show some declines, which I'm going to get to in the future, not because you're afraid of kids. It's that you really attracted a ton of folks in the 90s that were in the childbearing age group. You add 20 years to them, they're no longer in the childbearing age group, and so you get less kiddos coming into the system. And that's really all it has to do with it. But we'll talk a little bit about that. When we migrate people to Colorado, what kinds of folks do we get? We get youngins. We attract youngins to the state. Really, our prime age group that we attract are the 22 to like 37 age group into the state. Very little movement, after the age of 65, which is where the red line is. And really, things very much slow down over the age after like kind of 45 for the state as a whole. Now, I'm just going to ask you a quick question. How many folks here are from Colorado? Yep, that's what I thought. So really the important piece to see here is about anywhere between a third to 40% of our population is native. The rest are coming in from outside of the state because of what you guys create here. The brand that you've created in Castle Rock, the brand that you've created in Douglas County attracts people to where you are from out of state. Now this is what it looks like for Douglas County and some of your neighboring counties. The green line is Denver. It's migration by age, definitely highly concentrated at the young end, so kind of the 18 to 30-year-old. And then we've got in the blue is Douglas County, really attracting a little bit older in that age group. And then we've got Arapahoe in the red. So really looking at that bread and butter right around that 35 age group, which, you guys are concentrated in single-family homes, a little bit higher income. Newbies in the workforce, at 25 aren't able to really afford a higher valued house. And so that's why you're really attracting that older adult, and they come with kids. They bring their kids with them because they hear about your schools. They start out in Denver, they have kids there. They can't afford them, or they want a bigger yard, so they move out, and you can see where they all move in at those older ages. Older at 35, okay? I'm just, it's all relative, right? Why do people move here? Why did you guys move here? Why did you move to Colorado? Well, for a lot of people, it's either they wanted to be here and found a job, or they found a job and moved here. And when I interview people, I'm horrible at luncheons. My first question, where are you from? How long you been here? What industry are you in? I mean, it's awful. And found out with my it's not a formal survey process, but within my surveying, it's about 50-50 right now in terms of people coming with a job versus not. And I just call that kind of risk averse, not risk averse, right? I mean, I met a guy a couple weeks ago, and he was in human services, so maybe this fit. He's like, oh no, I wouldn't move anywhere without a job. And so he came from Michigan to Colorado, but had found that job prior to coming and moved here. So jobs are critical, and that's what you guys are in the business of, right? So what is a job? It is a person requiring what? Housing units. So we're starting to hear from a lot of communities across the Front Range, you know, maybe we've had enough housing unit growth. And I'm like, huh, interesting. Are you done with economic growth? And they're like, what? No. Blasphemy, right? But if you aren't creating the housing units, where are people going to live? Now, not everybody has to live and work in Castle Rock. We know that. We know that people commute, and I'm going to show some graphs. But it's important to be thinking about how do we put people in different places, and that really is the job of communities to come up with that plan. So when we migrate people to Colorado, where do we get them from? Our biggest donor states are California, Texas, Florida, Illinois, and Arizona. A lot of it is based on size. That tends to be the biggest factor, as well as then proximity. Who are the biggest states that we lose people to? Texas, California, Arizona, Florida, and Wyoming. So really all we're doing is trading everybody back and forth between borders. In terms of net terms, California, Illinois, Wisconsin, Virginia, and Florida are the ones that we have our biggest net with. Our net increase are from these states. If we look at Douglas County, we're able to do county-to-county migration patterns. It's really funny. Who's your biggest donor county? Arapahoe. Who's your biggest loser to? Arapahoe. So you guys go totally back and forth between Arapahoe. But you can see your primary first 5, 6 places that you get folks from, 5 places, are all other Denver counties. And Denver Front Range counties are where people are moving in from. Then we've got Asia as a whole. It was weird looking at the data. It just says Asia. I'm like, well, that's a big place. So probably really looking at a lot of the high-tech, high-skilled labor coming in from there. Then Nevada, Elbert County, then Arizona, and then Boulder in terms of your net donors, where you're really attracting people from. You can then see where you lose people to as well, you know, really other Colorado counties. Then in terms of net terms, so the ins minus the outs, then it gets really diverse. So we've got Jeffco is up there first, but then New Jersey. All right, admit it. Who's from New Jersey? So this is not a good sample, or at least you're not willing to admit it. There we go. 1. We've got our 1 New Jerseyan. Nice. But then we've got Washington, Nevada, Virginia, Georgia, California, Arizona, Texas. So really all over the country are being attracted to Douglas County. Now we don't have this city to city, unfortunately, but it's nice to know that people have heard of you. You know, you're marketing well, you've created an image, you've created a brand for what you've got here in this part of the state. In terms of jobs, I know probably a lot of you in the back maybe can't see this, but what I wanted to focus on is what are the jobs that maybe create interest in this area? I highlighted your largest concentration of employment, second to government, is retail trade. And we know that with the mall and everything else that's going on around that you really are a retail hub. The primary one, and it's listed there very at the bottom, is government. And I don't want you to panic. Okay, so all of Douglas County schools are reported in Castle Rock, just because it's the county seat. Likewise, it's the county seat. So you get a lot of government jobs here just simply because of that. But it's an important piece to be thinking about is that level of that 38% of your total jobs, and again, a large share of those are the school district, are in Castle Rock, but then 14% in retail trade. And who's been hearing about transitions in the retail trade industry? I mean, so this is something definitely to be preparing for and understanding, watching diligently on what are those transitions. I mean, thank goodness I was talking, and you do have an Amazon facility here, so I'm assuming that you've got that relationship so that they're reporting the retail sales and getting it right to the place. But talk about a transition. What can Amazon Prime do to you and do to your industry and do to your facilities? Now, granted, you've created a regional center here for retail trade. I mean, people come in, this is great. We had kids in from Poland visiting for the summer. What was their first question? Can we go to Castle Rock? I was like, Poland knows about Castle Rock? You know, but all they do is Google about shopping. And that was the very first place that we wanted. And I live up in Denver, up in kind of northeast Denver. And so where did we go? We went to Castle Rock. You're welcome. You are welcome. But thinking about what could happen to your firm or your industry in terms of this transition in retail trade. How can you go with the flow? How can you leverage what's going on with Amazon Prime and other industries that are going to that delivery method? Then we can see kind of some of the other areas: accommodations, food service, healthcare, professional and technical services, again, a very strong industry for Douglas County as a whole. But looking at what really draws people here and draws people to also the county. If we look at employment change over time since 2010, you know, Douglas County's been rocking it, as well as Castle Rock. We're all benched to index to 1 in 2010 for Colorado and the county and the city to see what that trajectory is over time. And by 2016, Colorado as a whole is at about up 16% compared to employment in 2010. Castle Rock up 25%. You guys are rocking it. Douglas County up 26%. Of course, Castle Rock is in Douglas, so it includes them. But you guys have really been not turning things around, but really leveraging the recovery from the recession. Where has been your primary growth in that area, or since 2010? So the top ones are kind of highlighted in those colors. The orange color tend to be lower wage jobs. And that's what we've seen a lot of growth in, is in retail trade. We've seen Douglas County really increasing that growth, as well as admin and waste services, which is kind of a whole big service sector that tends to be lower wages. But then we also see health services, professional and technical services, financial and information, all with really fairly solid growth. So you've got this interesting dichotomy that I really talk about a lot for the state. A lot of growth at the high end and a lot of growth at the low end, wages. How do we accommodate that? How do we continue to make sure that Castle Rock, Douglas County, Colorado is a place where everyone can continue to live? If we look at average weekly wages over time, I just throw this in here because people, no matter what, will ask the question, and I don't have the slide, so I'm going to put it in here so you won't ask the question. But just looking at average weekly wages over time since 2010, this is in nominal terms, not real. If we were in real, we'd probably see a lot of downward pressure, unfortunately. But we can see it's at least holding fairly steady for Castle Rock, up definitely since 2010, up from $7.59 to $8.57. Adjusted for inflation, I'm not sure we'd see that increase. And then we can see for Douglas County as a whole up as well. Creation, you know, again, you've hit a lot of the higher wage jobs, but a lot of the lower wage jobs as well. So, do you guys see any traffic at all? I laugh. It's funny, I usually don't pull off necessarily into Castle Rock unless, of course, I'm coming from Denver with a bunch of kids to go to outlet malls. I do a lot of traveling on I-25. It's nothing against Castle Rock. It's just I typically am on my way trying to get home before midnight. And at midnight, I will tell you, the traffic's not too bad. But when I leave in the morning and I'm trying to get somewhere, there is a bottleneck. And so we know that a lot of people live in Castle Rock, yet work somewhere else, or work somewhere else, or live somewhere else and commute in. The dark green circle are the total jobs in Castle Rock. And this is 2014 data, so it's a little dated, but it's the only one that's still available through this tool called On the Map. The light green circle in its entirety is your labor force. And where the two intersect is where your labor force actually live and work here in Castle Rock. So we can see that there's a lot of people that leave town, and this is really what the chart on the right-hand side is where your workers are employed. So the biggest, place where a lot of people go to is Denver. You've got a lot of out migrants or out commuters into Denver. And then you've got, your next largest share, which is nice, is here, right here in Castle Rock. And then we've got all the other guys, Centennial, Aurora, Greenwood Village, Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs, huh? So we see this pull between the two sides because Castle Rock is just kind of right there nicely in the middle, creating a wonderful community. And we know that what's going on down in El Paso County is driving growth here, as well as what's happening in the North Front Range and the Denver, high Denver Central metro area is also impacting Castle Rock. But that also means, what do you guys need to always be planning for? Transportation, infrastructure, getting people from point A to point B, because you really are kind of in this epicenter along I-25, creating a great community, but you know that people live and work in different places. Just as I think the picture is kind of fun, this is really showing people that live in Castle Rock, where do they commute to? And so sometimes the visual display, you're like, huh, really? They go that far? Yeah, they do. And if I could have brought it in, people even go up to Fort Collins. Anybody commute up to Fort Collins? Heavens. That would be a tough one, but there are people that are going up there, and so you can see definitely going down to Colorado Springs and Denver, in that central Denver area, a lot of people commuting up there. So again, we know that those transportation corridors are really important, and that infrastructure is really important, and some of it you don't have any control over. But that's where you need to potentially have larger meetings with other players to let them know how important infrastructure development is to Castle Rock and to Douglas County. All right, the age talk. You ready? All right, we're all getting old, and we're getting old pretty fast. Sorry. But we're getting old pretty fast because we're young. So if we look at Colorado's age distribution, it's broken down, and we have this for every county on our website from 1990 through 2050. It's pretty eye-opening to take a look at it. We've got it broken down by generation. Starting off, we've got the silent generation, or the greatest generation, the far right side, and then we've got the silent generation followed by those boomers. Then we've got Gen X, the millennials, and the next generation. And you can really see this differentiation between the baby boomers and the silent generation. And a lot of it is due to our migration patterns. What kind of folks do we migrate to Colorado? Youngins, right? How long does it take a youngin to get older? Oh, like 20 to 30 years. We got a slew of youngins in the 70s. And it's just happened to take, whoa, I'm bouncing. Is everybody else too? Oh, I was like, earthquake. I was a little nervous. So we've got a lot of these boomers here, and we didn't have a lot of folks before them. So that's why we're feeling this aging pretty fast. This is Douglas County. You really didn't have a lot of older people. Look at what's coming. So Douglas County is one of the one of the most interesting counties for us to watch in terms of aging, because of what did we always hear about? All those kids, right? It's also one of the fastest aging counties in the state. Has your Human Services Department been talking at all? Has the County Human Services Department been talking at all? You've got one of the fastest aging populations in the state, yet the services really aren't necessarily geared to that because you've been thinking about all of these youngins. all of these kiddos in school. And so it's a very different dynamic here where you've actually got a huge Gen X population. Not as many boomers necessarily, because a lot of these folks are the ones that came in and created those guys in school. And as these guys age through time, this is really going to be a very different transition for you guys in terms of, and especially related to retail sales and service demands by the industry. If we look at Castle Rock, where do you guys fit into the position? So we've got it in 3 different time periods. Blue is 2000, red is 2010, and green is 2015, the most recent data that we have available. So look at that huge jump between 2000 and 2010 in almost every single age group, following a lot of your population growth. Look at all those kiddos. And you can see along those different age groups, but grew at all ages. Now, between 2010 and 2015, decline. Interesting. Very flat on the older kiddos. Slight increase in those 18 to 24. Very flat in the 25 to 34, which could explain why there's not as many of these guys, because you don't have these guys and these guys creating these guys. That's the way it works, right? We all know that. But where do we see some growth? The 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and the 65 plus. Interesting, isn't it? Are you guys planning for it? Are you guys servicing it? The 65 plus population is growing by 6% per year. Douglas County was growing by 2%. This is a population growing 3 times as fast as the total population for the county. Since when does your market grow by 6% per year? We see transitions in the retail economy, which may or may not be good, but we know a market is growing by 6% per year. Who is looking at services for aging adults? No one? One. So she's going to win. Everybody should be thinking about this. Everybody should be planning, from public services, healthcare services, police services. They're one of our most vulnerable populations. Now, granted, they're going to be young older, right? Or they're going to be the 65-year-olds. A lot of them don't need services. But if all goes well, guess what? 5 years after that, they're 70. And then they're 75. And then questions start happening in terms of providing services, providing care. So we're growing so fast because we're young. We're one of the youngest states in the U.S. We've got the 6th lowest share in the population in the U.S. of our population over the age of 65. But we're the 4th fastest growing state in our population over the age of 65. Because we don't have a lot of older, and we've got a lot of boomers. But we don't have a disproportionate share of boomers. Everybody's got boomers. Boomers are everywhere. Who's a boomer? Admit it. A lot of boomers here. There's about 1.3 million of your friends here in the state. About a quarter of our population is a boomer. By 2030, our 65 plus population will be increasing from 719,000 to 1.2 million just by aging. Because did you see a lot of migration over the age of 65? Not that much. Just by celebrating birthdays, we're going to be increasing that 65 plus population. Are we all of a sudden going to become an old state? No, because what do? We migrate youngins. Maybe, right? People have choices. Heard of Utah? Heard of Washington? Heard of Oregon? They're taking our folks. We're seeing a lot of people moving into those states. Can we continue to attract and retain the best and the brightest? Now, I know that Castle Rock is doing a ton to create a vibrant community, to create an outdoor rec community, to create shopping experiences and life experiences here? Can we continue to attract the best and the brightest? Just a little bit of a picture in terms of looking at our aging, as if you really needed to see a picture, but this is what we looked like in 1990, this age distribution. So we've got a slew of those boomers right here. You can see the baby boom aging through. In 1990, they were in that age group of kind of 25 to 44. Very few, you can see, very few older adults, very few in this kind of 45 to 64-year-old age group. But between 1990 and 2010, what did we grow? That's what this 2010 is the green, where you can see the color is the age group that grew. So we saw that increase in migrants. We attracted a lot of folks to the state. What else did we see? Wow, these folks grew. It's mostly because they aged into it. This kind of think of it as a conveyor belt. These guys aged forward. So where did we see our strongest growth? In the 45 to 64-year-olds. Tell me something about 45 to 64-year-olds. Highest earning, highest spending, highest property tax paying. That's our bread and butter. And guess what it was doing? It was growing really fast at about 6% per year. The state made some choices during that time period, assuming that that growth was going to be forever. But what do? We age. We age over time. And so this is 2010 and this is 2030. Where do we see some growth between 2010 and 2030? Well, we see it in the youngins if we can continue to attract and retain. So this is an uncertainty. We don't know if we're going to get them because this is our age group right now. We only know that this is our supply to age. This is what we're assuming is migration. Where do we see very little growth? Oh, in the 45 to 64-year-olds. Bummer. Big bummer. Because they're our highest spending, highest earning, highest property tax paying. Where do we see growth? At that older end. Tends to be lower earning because they're retiring, which is all good. That's what we're supposed to do. Lower sales tax paying because they're not spending their dollars there. Where are they spending their dollars? Healthcare and eating out. What have we seen as our fastest growing industries in Colorado? Healthcare and eating out. I wonder why. Really important to watch these age trends, especially because of your dominance in the retail trade industry. How do we make sure that these older adults really are transitioning well into your retail trade package of goods and services? So what are we forecasting for Douglas County? I'm talking about all of this aging, and I do want to reiterate, and this is just between 2016 and 2030, we're seeing some pretty flat growth on the youngins. We're still seeing some growth in the 25 to 44. Again, this is the folks that you're attracting, new entrants, new movers to the county. A little bit of growth in the 45 to 64-year-olds, but really a lot of growth in that 65 plus. You like that, 65 to 120. At 120, you're done. No, that's pretty good to make it to 120, man. But your largest age group, which is actually positive to see, and it's not the same for the whole state, is this 45 to 64-year-old age group. So I may have been talking a little panicked about, really, do you know what's going on? Your bread and butter is still this highest earning, but it's not growing as fast. And velocity of growth is really important to be thinking about in terms of capturing some of that growth. What are some of the things that the city and the county should be thinking about? All of these. Just absolute number change, looking at their impact on the occupational mix, looking at their demand, where are they going to be buying goods and services? Labor force. Who said that they had an issue maybe attracting labor force? Some folks. We've got all of these boomers. Guess what they're going to be doing? Aging out. Now I know a lot of you are saying, I'm not leaving. Well, that's fine, but eventually you will. It might not be at 65, it might be at 75. Or you might be saying, heck no, I'm out at 55. But we know that labor force participation rates, even with increases that we've seen over time, decline with age. So we've got all of these leavers from the labor force. We've got fewer people actually entering the labor force. So what is that doing to the labor force? Squish. Tightening. Competing for the best and the brightest. Not only are you having to compete with folks in Arapahoe County or in El Paso County or in Denver, but with Utah, Washington, Arizona, Texas. Do you know how inexpensive it is to live in Texas? Now, granted, it's Texas, right? I have to say that because I work for the state. But we're competing with them for the best and the brightest. And we now know that that labor force is getting tighter and tighter. So how do we attract and retain the best and the brightest? And I know as business folks, that is really important to what's going on with you guys. Race and ethnicity, we're becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. Now, I will say that compared to Colorado, both Douglas County and Castle Rock are not as diverse as this state. If we look at kind of the white non-Hispanic, Colorado as a whole is right around that 70%, or we see this like 90 and 92% for Castle Rock and Douglas County. And we can also see in terms of the other race ethnic groups, really the other predominant race ethnic group is Hispanic in the state. But we're becoming more diverse. And if we look at the state as a whole, in 1970, about 85% of our population was white non-Hispanic, about 10% Hispanic, and then about 5% all other race ethnic groups. In 2010, we can see especially that Hispanic component increasing to about 20%, with about 10% all other race ethnic groups. And by 2040, we're forecasting that Hispanic population to be about 33%, about 12% all other race ethnic groups, and white non-Hispanic about 55%. And a lot of people ask me, they're like, how do you know that? How can you predict ethnicity? Well, the easiest way to do it, and again, my job is not rocket science. I don't want to give away any tricks of the trade at all. But all we have to do is look at our kids. This is what our age distribution looks like by race and ethnicity. If we look at our population under the age of 18, we're already almost there. You age everyone forward. Guess what? These guys and gals are aging out of the labor force. These guys are aging in. And what we end up seeing is that about 65% of the increase in our labor force will be Hispanic. Who is actively engaging and working with all kids, but especially Hispanic, for your labor force? No one? One, maybe? The largest growth in our labor force will be Hispanic. A lot of times these are non-traditional, these are folks that are going to be moving into non-traditional industries maybe that their family's been in. The number one industry that has been talking to us about trying to get Hispanics into the labor force, financial institutions. We've had probably 5 one-on-ones with companies coming to our office saying, what do we do? How do we get Hispanics into financial services? And I'm like, all right, have you started with middle school? Have you started with high school? Letting them know that there's career paths in this area? Because they're looking at the 35-year-olds. And I'm like, it's too late by then. Not totally too late, but you got to get them young. Don't start with high school. They've lost their minds in high school. I've got 2. I know they've lost their minds. You've really got to get them young and bring them in and know that they can be in construction, they can be in engineering, they can be in financial services, they can be in retail, they can be in health services. Most important piece for creating your labor force in the future is to be engaging the entire population. And as 70% of our entrants are Hispanic, the successful companies are going to be the ones that get them in and get them trained and get them to know what they can do. This is for the state. Now, if we look at Douglas County, no, Castle Rock, just at looking at the K-5, so we're looking at the youngins, we can also see that diversity over time starting to increase to where in 2011-2012 school year, we see the Hispanic population at about 16%, increasing right now to about 21%. Now, if I remember 5th grade, 10, is that 10 years old? Now, they're not your workers yet, right? They shouldn't be your workers yet. But we know that this diversity is starting to take place. These guys are going to be entering into middle school next year. Making sure that you've got programs in place with your chamber, with different organizations getting into the schools to let people know about career paths and career opportunities, I think is going to be really important. So income is starting to slow, and I know that's not good news, but I want to tell you why it's slowing so you don't panic. It really has to do with your age. Not just yours, ours, the entire state. What did we talk about? That slowing of the 45 to 64-year-olds, the end of our demographic dividend. So just because that age group is slowing down as a growth rate, that's putting downward pressure on household income. Talked about the increase in the occupational mix at high wage and low wage jobs. That's putting downward pressure on household income. The increase in our racial diversity is putting downward pressure on household income. Because there still has been an educational achievement gap, education goes straight into incomes. That put downward pressure on household income. Type and size, this is just stupid math. You've got fewer people per household, fewer earners per household, that puts downward pressure. So if you use household income as any indicator or trend in any of the work that you do, use it with discretion. Because you need to take into a factor that there's fewer people per household as well. And then, those millennials. All right, millennials, I saw maybe a couple. One, yeah, there we in the back. In the back there, I'll admit it. So, embrace your millennials. A lot of them have been or underemployed during the recession. Most of them were entering the labor force at that time. And I know they're a little crazy, right? Sometimes they show up in not the ones here. Sometimes they may show up in jammies. Maybe they're connected to their phone all the time. Maybe they talk about quality of life. No, that's all. It's all good. We're all right with that. The point is, who's your bread and butter? 45 to 64-year-olds. The only way to get to a successful 45 to 64-year-old is to take your wonderful 25 to 34-year-olds, make sure they've got housing, make sure they've got job opportunities, training opportunities, make sure that they are successful and can move up into those higher earning age groups, because right now, data shows that they are behind. If you compare millennials, boomers, and Xers, all at the ages of 25 to 34, lower household income. That is not good, because we need them out there spending their dollars. 70% of our economy is what? Consumer driven. So take care of your millennials. Embrace them, bring them in, train them to create great 45-year-olds. Last piece I'm going to talk about is just this slowing in the economy and slowing in Colorado as a whole, because I know there's whispers out there maybe not Castle Rock, but certainly along the Front Range where people are saying, maybe we should slow some growth. All right, that's fine. Everybody's got a community preference. But I want you to know what factors are coming into place that may naturally be creating some slowing. So I talked before about this whole concept of natural increase in birth, and we hit that peak in 2008. So births minus deaths. This is where we are right now. Basically almost pretty flat, not returning back to our 40,000 in natural increase. We're also forecasting that net migration is slowing. Why? Because we're forecasting slowing job growth. Why? Because the US job growth is slowing. Why? Because of those boomers. Those boomers are leaving the labor force. We need somebody to fill their job, plus create new jobs. So it's really this constraint in the labor force that will be putting downward pressure on job growth. So naturally, we may be seeing this slowing. So we don't, just be aware. I'm not going to tell you what to do, obviously. That's not my job. I want you to be aware of what factors are coming into place. Just be aware that there's these natural factors putting downward pressure. But we're forecasting the state to increase from about 5.5 million in 2015 to 7.8 million in 2040 and about 8.5 million, 8.6 million in 2050. Wait, what? Didn't I say we're slowing? If we do the math, we're forecasting that Colorado between 2010 and 2040 will increase by 2.8 million people. What? That's slower? 2.8 million by 2040 additional people in the state. Of that 2.8 million, 2.4 on the Front Range. 2.4 in the Front Range? 1.5 in the Denver metro area. 500,000 up north between Larimer and Weld, 400,000 down south between El Paso and Pueblo, with the remaining 400,000 around the rest of the state. What does 2.4 million feel like? It's what the Denver metro area was in 2010. Yeah, wow. Where are we going to put them? How are we going to get them from point A to point B? Oh, and look at Douglas. Right in between. What could happen here? Now, I always talk about is demographics destiny. In a way, you can't stop age, right? But you can plan well for change and plan well for growth. Forecasting right now, and we're using Douglas County build-out numbers, forecasting Douglas County to increase from 322,000 in 2015, it was just a nice round number with the 2015, increasing to about 481,000 by 2050. If we look at that, that's about 150,000, 160,000 people in that time frame. Average annual growth rate at about 2.2, declining to about 1.8, down to 1.7, 1.2, down to then 0.13, right when we hit that build out, kind of based on water. But that's kind of our forecast for this area. Now we know that forecasts are flexible, and we definitely like to work with the county. We don't do forecasts by municipality because we have really no idea what your plans are. Maybe that's our forecast for the state and forecast for here. Because if we look at median household income or median home value across the state, we see that the darkest color is the highest median home value. We see high in the eastern seaboard, high on the western seaboard, high in Colorado. There's a lot of other states people can move to. Can we continue to attract and retain the best and the brightest? It's probably no wonder why we get a lot of people from both the East Coast and West Coast, because our prices, they're like, that's nothing. Our traffic, that's nothing. For them, but for us, painful. So, big picture, long run, how do all of these things impact Castle Rock? What's great is that you've got a lot of community engagement. You've got a great staff working here. You've got great organizations, but the big questions are, really, how do we attract and retain? And retaining is just as important, the best and the brightest, and where do we put them? This disparate growth maybe doesn't influence you as much, but is there something that we can do to help the guys that aren't growing with the guys that are growing maybe too much? Are there some partnerships, collaborations that can be done? Aging, if I come back to Castle Rock, if I'm ever invited back after today, I want to see people raising their hands when they're talking about how are they providing goods and services. This is an important market to be looking at with the aging of the population. Likewise, I want to see hands up when they're talking about, yes, this is what we're doing to attract a diverse labor force. These are our strategies. This is our plan. I know you're not as diverse as the rest of the state, but you're bringing in people to work here from the rest of the state that are more diverse. To be successful, you've got to have a successful labor force. Think about how slowing income might impact your retail trade sector. What can we do to continue to attract sales growth? And then likewise with population growth. We're still growing, and I know we're going to feel it, and people are going to still whine, and I whine because I have to drive with them. I-70, I-25, there's nothing like all your best friends on the highway together. It's painful, but it's up to your planners to help allocate people in their places in the infrastructure, and how do we get people from point A to point B. So with that, I think we've got a little bit of time for some questions, and I think Dave's going to manage that.
Questions, but let's thank Elizabeth for the presentation. We do have some time for questions for Elizabeth. Questions?
Not enough caffeine, I know. Oh.
Yeah, we're in the fire service, we're seeing the impact of the aging population. Thank you. Like I need one. Anyway, we're seeing an impact in the aging population in Castle Rock, and it's having a direct impact on service demand. And so, you know, part of our challenge is we're kind of at the effect of it. You know, when they're coming in or they're moving in. What are you seeing other agencies like that in emergency services doing to address that? Because we're pretty much in that responding to the demand, and we're seeing that, and we're seeing that when the influx happens with people that are in those higher ages, they're using our ambulances more. Are there any remedies that you see to be able to provide that service effectively without reaching in and adding more ambulances, more firefighters?
You know, that's a really good question. So really related to how are other emergency responders addressing the aging population well? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know, and I haven't heard of like information on best practices, but I think that that's a really good question to start looking at, and maybe already look at some counties and places that have already started that aging process. So it probably would not be a bad idea to talk to your colleagues like in Arapahoe, in Denver, in Jefferson. Actually, Jefferson would be the best. Talk to your colleagues in Jefferson County and see how they've addressed the aging population there. Jefferson is an older population kind of to begin with, and so they've been going through this for the last decade and a half. So that probably would be one of the best practices. And it's really just to embrace this idea, and it's so funny. Age is one of the factors that people are least likely to welcome. They're like, no, I'm not getting old. It's like, look in the mirror, man. No. We are aging, and it's hard with Douglas. Douglas has always just been known as this youngin' place, and so realizing that that's happening, that's where you're really going to see a lot of your growth in the future, I think is really important. Thank you.
the the projected increased lifespan of people moving forward?
Really good question. So the question is, are we taking into account changes in mortality over time? Absolutely. Yep, we change our numbers annually based on data from our Department of Health and Environment that provides the different death numbers so that we can look at those rates. And we actually have it different by county because people age differently, if you can believe that, age differently in different counties. So yes.
Elizabeth, what's the best county to age in?
Are
there counties where it's better to age in than others?
So it's funny. So the question is, are there better counties to age in? And you'd have to really kind of tell me what you mean by better. So what's very interesting is like and this is not going to come as much of a surprise, the counties that have higher incomes tend to have longer longevity because you take care of yourselves more and you invest in your health. A lot of the counties actually on the western slope, so the resort mountain communities, have longer longevity. A lot of them because they're more active and they lead a active lifestyle. So we've seen longevity there as well. We've seen shorter longevity on the eastern plains. So Eastern Plains and San Luis Valley. So it really, I mean, I know that that's probably not the fun answer you wanted, but there are all of these factors like income and lifestyle that lead to longevity.
Other questions?
I've got the mic. So a lot of the forecasting that you do is based on data from before. Are you taking into account factors like us having the best hospital in the Centura health system, attracting, the great job that Frank and the EDC is doing here with attracting economic growth, tech companies moving in, any of these factors, or is any of that taken into account in your data for forecasting forward?
So that's a really good question. When we do our forecasts, we do take what you look like now, both economically and demographically. We look at transitions in the economy nationally and where does Douglas County fit into the state and where does it fit into the nation in terms of its share of employment by industry. So it's a fair question to say, are you thinking about transitions we may be having? And that's where I'll say that we work a lot with the county. So Nancy Gideon is here. And so we communicate with her several times a year. Say, what's going on in Dougco? As well, we work with Dr. Cog and to make sure that we're on track with them. But the best thing really is this relationship that we have with the county and with the municipalities to know what their plan is. So I was quizzing them. I'm like, so what's your build out? So that we know what to plan for. So we try our best to put these changes in and what we would consider maybe attractors or detractors into that forecast. But a continual dialogue is the best way that we keep going forward because our goal is to be right. Right with you guys, right with the state, right with where it all fits together. Good question.
Another question.
So I admitted we moved here from Texas, and not long after pot was legalized. So all of our friends in Texas, said, "Oh, we know why you moved now." I'm just curious, how has that affected people in and out in real life? Like, what did that legalization do? Because I see some of the competing states also have the same laws. Just curious.
Yeah, no, I think there isn't a dialogue or presentation that doesn't go by where I don't get the pot question. So we know that there's obvious impacts to the state due to marijuana. But what's interesting, it's on both sides. Some of the financial service industries actually said that they're having a hard time attracting people to move to the state because of the legalization. Some companies that are in the transportation industry are having a hard time operating here because of marijuana and trying to find drivers that can pass tests. So we know that there's negatives, and we know that there's definitely where people have moved into the state for it as well. Now, do we stop you at the border and say, hey, why you coming? No, we don't. We know that there's about 14,000, 15,000 jobs that have been generated by the marijuana industry. So we know that there's this relationship between jobs and migration, so we know that there's an influence there. We know that there's some parts of the state where the only job growth was in the marijuana industry. So we know that most of that population growth had to have been due to marijuana because it was the only job industry that grew. But we also know on the negative side that there's been a definite increase in the homeless population, where a lot of people move to the state thinking, this is the industry I'm going to work in, but you actually have to pass background tests to operate in the industry. So there's a lot of folks that don't even qualify. That sounds funny. Don't even qualify for the marijuana industry. Now that other states are approving it for both medical and recreational, I think we'll obviously see less of an influence, especially like the Californias that are the bigger states in numbers.
Other questions?
Over the last 5 years, what's been the biggest surprise and why? And follow-on question, is there a looming sort of uncertainty or big variable out there going forward?
That's a really good question. So what is the biggest odd thing or biggest difference? So I think two things in terms of surprising. I was actually very surprised on how long it took us to recover from the recession. I thought that we would have bounced back potentially a little bit faster. Along that same line is that still about 2/3 of the counties are not back to pre-recession peak levels. So that's surprising, is that we haven't had a uniform recovery. Then related to that is that between 2010 and 2016, 95% of the total population growth was along the Front Range. First time in history. Front Range is about 87% of our total population, yet it received 95% of the total population change. Really illustrating that fact that this recovery has not been uniform, that there are places in the state that are not recovering. Mesa County, one of our largest MSAs, is still at only about 91, 92% of their pre-recession peak level. If that were the case for the state as a whole, we would still be down we lost about 4% of our jobs during the recession. If we were down 9%, we would be down like 420,000 jobs. So that's, I think, my biggest surprise is just really how non-uniform this recovery has been and our population growth has been.
Projected Douglas County at about a 1.9% growth rate from about 2015 forward. DOLA projects 475,000 by 2040. Our local demographers say 484,000. You rely on water issues as a constraint. That's true in 2010, 2012. Today, the water suppliers have got things together, and we're in pretty good shape through 2050, 2060. I look at our actual growth for 2015 was 2.6, 2.7 for 16, and I'm looking right now at 4.0% growth in additional registered motor vehicles in the last 12 months. 4.3% growth since January 1st. And so I have troubles with some of your underlying assumptions related to Douglas County. I think that, to me, those are leading economic indicators, not trailing. And those are hard numbers. Those aren't estimates. So I'm a little concerned about your conclusions. I understand the aging issue, although several of us in this row are well beyond where we should be 6 foot under. but your aging issues, I think, have some validity. But I'm really concerned about some of your underlying assumptions.
And remind her what you do for a living.
Clerk of the Board. Okay. So no, I think it's always important to question our assumptions. As I mentioned, what we end up doing really is our base assumption is looking at the industries in Douglas County, looking how they fit into the state as a whole, and how that fits into the U.S. as a whole, and how those industries are forecast to grow over time. Then we take your current population and we age them through time and look at birth rates and death rates, and they are a supply of workers. We also know that there's big thing is commuting in and out. So we take all that information, we put it together, and what we end up really doing is looking at a forecast for the Denver metro area as a whole. Then we work with the county a lot on, what's your build out? How many people can you get in? How many houses are you looking at? So we really look at the age dynamic as well as space dynamic. And, if you think that the 484 is too low for 2050 or 481 is too low, we would be happy to be looking, because we're trying to find places to put people. So we would be very happy upping Douglas County's forecast. So I would say that conversation is always open. Now, regarding vehicle registrations, the only thing as I'm going to say is that you have a lot of youngins turning 16. 17 and 18. That is your bread and butter youngin population, and they will wreak havoc on your roads. No. But that you will see an increase in number of vehicles per household just because of them. Yeah, I think that the jury's still out on that one. I'll love to watch that data over time, because that's what a lot of people are saying, is that you're going to get fewer and fewer vehicles per household. And I don't know. I'm still at the people still like cars, if they can afford them. But let's exchange contacts and look at where we're going. Again, we really rely on the county heavily, so we should bring the county into the conversation as well.
Question, Nicole?
Of today align with the forecast from 20 to 40 years ago?
Oh, such a good question. How good do we do? How good do we do? It all depends. I'm a true economist. It all depends. When you started that forecast, so we had a 1985 forecast for the year 2000, and we were 4% off for a really long time horizon. You assume that the assumption nationally is somewhere between 0.8 and 0.9% off, either high or low by each year. So over a 10-year time horizon, you could be up to 10% plus or minus. And we were only 4% off in a pretty long time. But the best thing about that is that we hit a boom in the 90s. We took in the bust of the 80s. We got another boom in the 2000s, and then we got a bust in the later 2000s. So it all depends if you get that boom and bust right and where you're forecasting from. So when we did our forecast in 1990 for the year 2000, we were actually further off because in 1990 we were still suffering from the recession of the 1980s. And we did not predict that boom of the 90s. And so we were definitely off on that time horizon. But long run, you know, so we do better than the US average forecaster in our area. Did that help at all? Very good. Sorry, I talked my way out of that bag, right? Or into the bag, I don't know. Is that it?
Any other questions? Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And you're definitely welcome to come back to Castle Rock, including the Outlet Center. So thank you again.
Thank you. Great, thank you.